I told a story last night to the wall, not out loud, just under my breath, barely a whisper. A tale I once told hundreds of times, maybe thousands, while sitting at the edge of a twin bed covered in dinosaur sheets or flowered blankets, depending on which child was drifting off to sleep. But now there's no bed, no child, just me, a sagging couch, and a white painted wall with the faint outline of where a painting used to hang. I don't know why I told the story. Maybe I was hoping the wallpaper would remember them for me. Maybe I was hoping the sound of my own voice would pull me back to who I used to be. You see, there was a time I was the final voice they heard before sleep, a mother, a queen in a bathrobe armed with soft words and lullabies, turning the chaos of the day into calm. Now I say those same words to an empty room, not out of madness, but out of need. Something inside aches if I don't. And the strange thing is I don't even realize I'm doing it half the time. The stories slip out like breath, like habit, like muscle memory, from a woman who no longer knows what else she's supposed to be. Once my voice held power. It could chase away nightmares. It could make tired eyes sparkle again with wonder. I remember one night one of the kids had a fever. I sat beside them and told stories until the sweat cooled on their forehead, and they fell asleep clutching my hand. I stayed the whole night. I didn't even pee. I didn't want them to wake up scared. I was that kind of mother. And now the only hands I hold belong to the railings in the hallway. Now I'm the one who wakes in the middle of the night sweating heart-pounding, wondering where I am blinking at the shadows in a room that's never known the sound of laughter. And when I do, when I sit up in that too-short bed with the plastic mattress and thin blanket, I speak again quietly into the dark. A line from a story, a name, a memory. I don't think anyone hears me, and that used to make me cry. But I'm older now, and crying takes energy I don't have. It's not that I want to be dramatic. I don't expect anyone to knock on the door and say, "We're sorry, Mom, we remembered. We made a mistake." I just think about how strange it is, how a voice that once meant everything to them could become background noise, a forgotten song, a bedtime story told so many times they forgot who told it. One of the aides here told me she heard me mumbling the other night. She asked me what I was saying, and I just smiled and said, "An old habit." She laughed and moved on. That's fine. I'm used to people laughing and moving on. The worst part isn't that they don't ask what the story was. The worst part is that I still remember it. Every word, every twist, every giggle and gasp it used to get. There was this one story they used to beg for it. It wasn't even in a book. I made it up. Each night I'd twist it a little different, change a word, add a character. And they loved it. They believed in it. They believed in me. I was the source of all wonder. I created worlds before their eyes. Now the only world I live in has gray walls 3 meal times and reminders taped to the door. No magic, no dragons, no enchanted forests, just linoleum, an antiseptic, and bingo on Thursdays. I used to have a calendar full of plans, school pickups, birthday parties, sleepovers, parent-teacher meetings. My time was wrapped around theirs, their needs, their lives, and now time moves like fog. I stare at the clock and wonder how it's only 3 p.m., and sometimes without thinking I reach for a story again. Not for them, for me, because telling a story means I still exist. I remember the last time I told one with someone listening. It was to my grandson before they moved. He was squirming, distracted, half listening, as I reached the twist in the tale, and when I finished, he just said, "That's cool," and went back to his tablet. No kiss, no hug, just cool. I remember thinking, that's it. That's how it ends. But stories don't end like that. Not mine, anyway. Mine linger. Mine live in the corners, in the cushions, in the silence. That's why I whisper them to the walls. I know it sounds sad, and it is a little, but there's something beautiful, too, in holding your own voice even when no one's asking for it. Something tender in refusing to forget the stories, even when the characters do. I tell them softly as if the wallpaper might nod, as if the air remembers. And maybe it does. There used to be a rhythm in this house. Not this house exactly. This place is too sterile to ever hold rhythm, but the house I lived in when they were small. I still hear it sometimes like a phantom heartbeat, the creak of the hallway floor when they got out of bed to ask for one more story, the quiet hum of the fan in the summer, the clatter of cereal bowls in the morning, and always, always the sound of their little feet running. Now there are no little feet, just my own dragging a bit when I forget to lift them. Slippers that barely make a sound on this smooth floor, but in my mind, the echo of those tiny steps lives on. I used to sit at the kitchen table and sip my tea while they ran past me laughing, yelling, full of energy that made the walls vibrate. And I remember thinking, hold this, memorize this, because some part of me knew it wouldn't last. It didn't. The house emptied slowly. First came school, then sleepovers, then weekends at friends' places, then dating, college, careers. It all happened the way it was supposed to, I suppose. They grew up. They grew away. But no one tells you what to do with the parts of yourself that don't grow with them. The part that still listens for little feet in the hall. The part that still makes too much dinner just in case someone surprises you. The part that still believes, any minute now, one of them will burst through the door and say, I missed you, Mom. But no one comes. This new place, they call it a facility, but I call it what it is, a waiting room, a place where people go to be gently forgotten. The hallways here don't carry laughter. They echo with coughs, beeps shuffling. But I pretend sometimes. I close my eyes, and I'm back in that old hallway, the wallpaper peeling just a little, the family photos crooked on the wall. And there they are, running past one sock on one sock, missing, shouting, tell me the dragon won again. I told that story more than 100 times. I knew exactly where to pause to build suspense. I knew when to whisper, when to gasp, when to slow down so they could ask questions. They would clutch their blankets wide-eyed as if what I said could shape the very air around them. And it did. That's the thing, they didn't just listen. They believed me. But now, when I try to remember the story word for word, parts are missing. Whole scenes have slipped away like old dreams. I catch glimpses, flashes of a character's name or a line I used to say, but they vanish too fast. Maybe that's what happens when no one asks you to repeat it. Maybe the story dies when it has no audience. I sometimes wonder if they tell stories of me, when they're with their spouses, their kids, their friends. Do I ever come up? Do they say, my mom used to tell the best stories, or she could make anything magical, or do they just say, she's in a home now and move on? I'm not angry. I want to be, but I'm too tired. It's more like emptiness shaped like a memory, a hollowness where a child's laughter used to live. One of the staff here is kind, a young woman with warm eyes. She noticed I had a photo of my children beside my bed. She asked about them. I told her one used to pretend to be a knight, and the other a fairy queen. I described how they used to argue over which story we'd read. She smiled and said, they sound lovely, and I said, they were. But what I didn't say was they still are, somewhere out there. I just don't know if I belong in their world anymore. I tried writing them a letter once, not to guilt them, just to share a memory. I wrote about a night we all sat on the porch and watched a thunderstorm roll in, and how they begged for a story about the clouds being angry giants. I folded it carefully, addressed the envelope, but I never sent it, because suddenly I couldn't remember if they still lived at that address, or if they would even read it. And so the letter stayed in my drawer tucked between a half-used notepad and a pair of old reading glasses. Like everything else I hold on to, it waits quietly for someone to ask about it. I've learned something, though, about time. It's not just a thief, it's a trickster. It stretches when you're lonely and vanishes when you're needed. It's cruel and kind, and most of all, it's quiet, especially here, especially now. But I still listen. I still wait, and sometimes when I'm alone and I close my eyes, I can hear them again, the little feet running, not away this time, but toward me. And for a moment, the walls don't seem so empty. There's a chair I used to sit in one, with soft, worn arms, and a cushion that had molded itself to my shape over the years. It was next to the crib, then the toddler bed, then the bunk beds. That chair saw more stories than a library shelf. It saw tears wiped with the hem of a nightgown, sleepy heads resting against my shoulder, and little fingers tangled in my hair as they drifted off while I read. I remember how they'd ask me to stay just a little longer. "One more story, Mama." And I always did. Always. Even when my back ached, even when the laundry was piled high and my eyes were heavy, even when I had work waiting on the kitchen table. I stayed because I knew they would remember that. Not the dishes, not the emails, not the tired errands. They'd remember the stories, the sound of my voice guiding them into sleep. At least I thought they would. I was wrong. When they got older, that chair became clutter. I offered to give it to one of them when they moved out. I thought maybe they'd want to keep it for their own children someday. But they declined. It doesn't match the decor. That's what one of them said. Just like that. As if it had never meant anything more than a seat with fabric too faded to be fashionable. I tried not to let it sting. I told myself it was fine that memories live inside us, not in furniture. But I still think about that chair. I don't know where it ended up. Probably donated or left by the curb. Forgotten, like me. Here I sit on hard chairs with plastic arms or on a bed too small for stretching. Nothing in this room remembers me. I've been here almost a year, and nothing carries my shape the way that old chair did. Nothing welcomes me with that silent comfort that says, "You are known here." There's a chair in the common room, always empty, but it's near the TV that blares game shows too loud. I tried sitting in it once, hoping maybe it would feel familiar, but it didn't. No imprint, no story, just another chair. I suppose that's what happens when the stories stop. The objects lose their weight, their meaning fades. But I haven't stopped telling stories, not really. I still make them up in my head, though. No one asks for them. I saw a shadow move across the hallway the other day, just an old man with a walker, but for a moment, I imagined he was a time traveler, lost between decades. In my mind, I told his story. I gave him a name, a purpose, a daughter who missed him. Then he turned, and I saw his eyes were empty, confused, and I felt guilty for turning him into a character when he was just trying to remember how to get to the dining room. I suppose I do that a lot, now make people into stories. Maybe because I don't have many of my own anymore. Or maybe because I need to believe we're all still part of something bigger, something unfolding, even if it's slow, even if it's sad. I told one of the nurses that I used to be a bedtime storyteller. She smiled politely, but I could see she didn't quite understand. Not really. She said, "That's sweet and patted my hand, and I wanted to scream not out of anger but out of loss, because it wasn't sweet. It was sacred. It was everything. Being the storyteller meant I was the last voice before sleep. I was the guardian of dreams. My words protected them. They trusted me with the thin space between wakefulness and rest. And what's more intimate than that? Now I speak only to fill the silence. Sometimes at night I look around my room and see shapes in the dark. Not people, just tricks of light and shadow. But for a moment, they look like someone sitting beside the bed, waiting for the story to begin. And I speak, softly, just a line or two. The wall doesn't interrupt. The clock doesn't roll its eyes. The air doesn't say, "Mom, I'm tired." It listens. In its own way, it listens. And that's enough. For now, that's enough. The goodnight kiss vanished so slowly, I almost didn't notice it was gone. At first it was just a missed night, too tired, too much homework, a sleepover at a friend's house. Then it became a pattern, a mumbled night through a half-open door, a distracted nod from the hallway. Eventually even the door stopped closing and the kiss never came. I used to lean down gently, kiss each child on the forehead, and brush their hair away with my fingertips. I'd whisper, "Sleep tight," and they'd smile with eyes already drifting shut. There was a kind of magic in those moments, a sacred softness that nothing else could replicate. I believed back then that the act of saying goodnight wrapped them in safety, that my love was a shield they carried into their dreams. Now the nights are silent, no kiss, no forehead, just me pulling my own blanket up to my chin, tucking myself in like an old doll no longer played with. I sometimes forget that it's my job now to care for myself, to speak the goodnight aloud if I want to hear it, so sometimes I do. I whisper it to no one. Or maybe I whisper it to the version of myself that once belonged to someone's nighttime ritual. There's something so cruel about how gentle neglect can be. It doesn't slam the door. It doesn't yell. It just stops showing up, stops calling, stops touching. And before you know it, you're invisible, but not in a dramatic way. Not like a ghost with purpose. More like a smudge no one notices on the corner of a photo frame. One of the nurses asked if I wanted anything before bed the other night. I almost asked her for a kiss. Not because I expected it, but because I wanted to remember what it felt like to be worth that small gesture. But I didn't ask. I just said, "No, thank you," and smiled. I always smile. It's a reflex now, like brushing my teeth, like turning out the light in an empty room. When my children were young, I'd read books about animals that cuddled together for warmth, bears in caves, foxes in dens, ducks under wings. I wanted them to know that comfort wasn't just about blankets, it was about presence, that warmth was something we gave each other. I thought I was teaching them something important, something lasting. But the last time we all hugged, I don't even remember it clearly. There was a holiday, a rushed goodbye, promises to call that melted into silence. They live in other cities now, different states even. They have homes of their own children, of their own. I imagine they kiss their kids goodnight, tell them stories, hum lullabies. I hope they do. I truly do. But I wonder when those kisses stop for them, will they notice? There's an ache that grows when something disappears slowly. It's not like ripping off a bandage. It's more like watching a photograph fade in the sun. You keep glancing at it, thinking it's the same, until one day the colors are gone, and all that's left is a blur. I used to tell them, "You'll always be my babies," and they'd laugh, roll their eyes. But secretly, I think they liked it. It meant something. It meant that even as they grew taller than me, even as they learned to drive or move out, there was a place where they'd always belong. Now I'm not sure where I belong. Not in their busy schedules, not in their holidays. I'm a name on a list. A birthday card they remember if Facebook reminds them. A voicemail they don't quite know how to return. I sat on my bed last week and kissed the palm of my own hand. Just once. Just to see if it would stir anything. It didn't. But I still did it. Because the body remembers even if the heart forgets. There's a line from one of the old bedtime books they used to beg for it every night. You are loved more than all the stars. I said it so many times I could recite it with my eyes closed. And now sometimes I do, not because anyone's listening, just to hear the words out loud, just to know they still exist. I am not bitter. I am tired. There is a difference. Bitterness wants something back. Tiredness just wants to be held, or remembered, or kissed goodnight. I kept the books, all of them, even the ones with crayon marks on the cover's pages taped back together with trembling hands' corners, curled from being read again and again. When I moved here, I brought 3 boxes full old picture books, bedtime stories, even the ones with pop-ups half torn from age. The staff thought I was confused. You won't need all of those, one of them said kindly. But I wasn't confused. I was carrying what mattered. Because those books aren't just ink and paper. They are voices mine and theirs entwined. They are tiny fingers turning pages too fast, impatient to get to the dragon, the treasure, the kiss that wakes the sleeping princess. They are nights when the rain beat against the windows, and we made a fort with blankets and read by flashlight until our laughter drowned out the storm. They are everything I built with my voice. There's one book I can't even open anymore without crying. A little blue one with a rabbit on the front. I read it to each child from the day they were born. The first time they didn't even understand the words. They just stared at my mouth wide-eyed as if trying to decode what made it move that way. Over time, they started to mimic the sounds, finish the rhymes, anticipate the page turns. It became our ritual, our spell. And now the binding is broken, the pages slide out if I'm not careful. I wrap it in a towel like something sacred. Because it is. They outgrew those books before I was ready. At first they asked for longer stories, then chapter books, then none at all. I'm too old for that, they'd mutter, and I'd nod like it didn't sting, like I hadn't built whole worlds just to see their eyes widen. I remember once I must have been tired or distracted. I skipped a sentence. My youngest corrected me immediately, their little finger pointing to the line. You missed the best part, they said, and I laughed, heart swelling. Because they'd memorized it, because it mattered. Now I sit in my chair and read aloud sometimes just to feel the echo of what we shared. No one listens, no one needs to. I read for the air, for the walls, for the ghost of childhood that still hovers around me asking for just one more. I showed one of the aides a book once. She was sweet, said her son loved the same story. I tried to tell her what it meant to me, how many nights I read it, how many tears I wiped away between sentences. But she had to go something about medication rounds, and I just sat there holding the book like a child, cradles a stuffed animal pretending it was enough. The saddest thing is I don't think they even know I kept the books. I don't think they'd care if they did. To them it's just clutter, old stuff, forgotten rituals. But to me, it's the truest record of love I ever gave. Not the birthday parties, not the school forms signed at midnight, not the packed lunches with little notes tucked inside. No, the stories were the heartbeat, the voice in the dark, the promise that even when the world was too big, too loud, too unfair, they were safe. Sometimes I wonder what stories they tell their children, if any. Are they busy, distracted, too tired like I was so often? Do they skip pages? Do they know how much their children will remember? I hope so. I hope somewhere late at night one of them is whispering the line I once whispered to them, and the moon watched over you while you slept. I hope the voice they use sounds a little like mine. I hope in that moment they remember the book with the torn corner, the breathless anticipation of the last line, the way I held them even when they were too old to ask. And I hope just for a second they miss me. I used to have such a strong voice, not loud, not commanding, just steady, steady enough to be trusted, soft enough to be loved. But somewhere along the years it began to fade, not all at once. Like the stories, it slipped away gently. With every ignored comment, every brushed-off suggestion, every phone call where they let me speak and didn't truly hear, I lost just a little more of it. There was a time when they'd sit up straight at the sound of my voice, when they listened, really listened like my words shaped the world around them. Now if I speak too long on the phone, if they answer at all, I can hear them clicking on something in the background, typing, scrolling, distracted hums and polite s, while I pour out memories I've held onto for decades. So I speak less. That's what happens. You shrink. Not physically, though. That's true, too. My clothes hang looser now. My back bends more than it used to. But I mean your presence, your place in the room. When your voice stops being asked for, you start offering it less, until one day you find yourself speaking mostly to yourself or to the walls. It's not as crazy as it sounds. There's comfort in talking to the quiet. The walls don't interrupt. They don't rush you. They don't glance at a clock or sigh softly like you're a chore they didn't expect. They just absorb it all. Every word, every pause, every old memory that no one wants to hear anymore. There was a moment last winter I remember, because the radiator in my room was clanking like a heartbeat, that I started telling the story of the lost mitten aloud, as if my grandchild were still curled up next to me. I caught myself midway and stopped embarrassed, though no one was around. And then I realized I wasn't embarrassed at all. I was relieved, because my voice still knew how to wrap itself around a story. And that's something. I wonder if they ever notice how much I've stopped talking when we're together. On those rare visits, once or twice a year, maybe I mostly let them fill the air. I smile and nod. Ask how their work is going, how the kids are doing in school. They answer in short bursts, and then drift back to their phones, their email, the waiting world beyond the room. And I stay silent, because if I say too much, they might feel guilty, or worse, bored. It's strange how someone who once shaped your entire world can become background noise, but I've learned to live there, in the background. It's quieter, but not empty. Not yet. Because when I whisper a story into the air, I hear the echo. My voice may be softer, but it's still mine. And in that softness, there's something fierce, something unbroken. I think of the nights when I stayed up long after they'd fallen asleep, folding laundry, or scrubbing dishes, or sewing buttons back onto coats, and how I would hum to myself a lullaby no one heard. Back then, I didn't think of it as strength. It was just what had to be done. But now I see it clearly. I was the pulse of that home, the rhythm, the warmth. Now the home is gone. The children are gone. But the pulse, it's still here, faint as it may be. Sometimes I catch myself humming again as I brush my hair in the morning, or when I stare out the window at the parking lot below. I hum the same lullabies, the ones I used to sing when their nightmares woke them up and they came padding down the hallway with damp cheeks and outstretched arms. They don't remember those nights, I'm sure of it, but I do. I remember all of them. And I carry them, in my voice, in the silence between my words. So maybe I don't need them to listen anymore. Maybe I just need to keep speaking. They said it would be temporary, just until I adjusted. They used words like safety support and routine, but they didn't say the word that rang loudest in my chest displacement. They called it moving me in. I call it rearranging a life that no longer fit into theirs. The room they gave me is small, serviceable, clean in the way a hospital is clean sanitized, not warm. A bed that creaks when I shift, a wardrobe that smells faintly of someone else's past, and a window that looks out over a concrete courtyard with 3 benches and a sad little bird bath. It was not chosen with me in mind. It was chosen for its availability, for its vacancy. I stood there the first day holding a bag I didn't pack, surrounded by faces I didn't recognize. One of the staff smiled too brightly and said, "Let's make this space your own." And I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. How does one make a space feel like home when home wasn't a place but a role, a purpose? A story told in dinner tables and laundry baskets and messy floors and too many shoes by the door. They didn't ask if I was ready. They asked if I understood. There's a difference. I had a house once, not grand, but filled with life. Walls covered in children's drawings. A fridge plastered with spelling tests and stick figure masterpieces. A hallway lined with photographs, each a frozen reminder of a season I once lived in. And now the only photo frame I own fits in the palm of my hand. It holds a picture taken a decade ago, our last family vacation. Smiling faces, sunglasses, arms wrapped around shoulders in ways we no longer do. They let me bring a few things. The books, of course. A sweater I knitted when my joints were still kind. A music box that no longer plays. I placed them carefully on the shelf like tiny memorials. Not to show off, but to remind myself I existed before this. The hardest part is the silence. Not just the absence of noise, but the absence of being wanted. There's no one calling from another room, no one asking where their socks are or if there's more juice. No one leaving wet towels on the bathroom floor for me to scold them about. I miss the mess. I miss the interruptions. I miss being necessary. Now I knock on doors before entering a shared space. I wait in line to warm a cup of tea. I ask permission to hang a cardigan on the back of a chair. There's a kind of humbling in it, yes. But there's also a quiet erasure. A soft sanding down of everything I used to be. They meant well. I know that. My children. They were overwhelmed trying to juggle their own lives. And maybe I did fall more than once. Maybe I forgot the stove was on or where I put the phone. But I was still me. I was still me. I wonder if they told themselves this was kindness, that placing me here was an act of love. Maybe it was. But it didn't feel like love. It felt like exile. A few days ago, I moved the furniture, just slightly. A chair angled toward the window, the books closer to my bed, the picture frame facing inward, so I could see it when I wake. No one noticed. No one commented. But it felt like a small rebellion, a quiet declaration that I still exist, that I still choose, even in a space that wasn't chosen for me. There's a mark on the wall where someone else's painting once hung. I stare at it often, a pale square against beige stubborn in its memory. I like that. I like that the wall remembers what was there before, even if no one else does. Maybe I'm like that wall, faded marked still holding the outline of what I once held. I sit in my rearranged room now, and sometimes I imagine telling my children a story. One where the hero isn't young or strong or beautiful, but steady, still standing, still holding the past without shame. And in that story, the hero isn't rescued. She rescues herself by remembering, by refusing to vanish. I may not have chosen this place, but I choose not to disappear inside it. My birthday came and went last month. I only remembered because one of the aides brought me a slice of sheet cake from someone else's party. It had blue frosting and a tiny balloon drawn in icing that had already smudged. She handed it to me with a napkin and said I figured you might want a little treat. I nodded, smiled, said thank you, and sat quietly on the edge of my bed, chewing each bite, slowly trying to make it mean something. No one called, not that day, not the next. I checked the hallway every hour or so, half expecting someone, a nurse, a neighbor, even a stranger to pop in with a surprise, or someone left this for you. But the hall stayed still, the silence more pronounced than usual. I didn't cry, not at first, just stared out the window at the parking lot and counted how many cars came and went, none of them for me. It's not the forgetting that hurts most, it's how ordinary it feels now. There was a time when birthdays were celebrations, not for me but for them. I went all out. Homemade cakes shaped like animals or cartoon characters, paper crowns, treasure hunts. I'd stay up late the night before blowing balloons until my cheeks hurt, tying little ribbons around tiny favors, practicing how I'd sing their name when the candles were lit. And the looks on their faces, the awe, the pure joy, those moments are seared into me. But mine slowly stopped mattering. First it was a last-minute card, then a rushed phone call. Sorry, Mom, I've got a meeting, but I love you. Then even that stopped. I told myself I didn't mind, that once you're a mother, your birthdays belong to everyone else. You become the background to their shining lights. This year, no one even remembered the background existed. I used to think that being selfless was the highest form of love, that shrinking so your children could grow meant you'd earned your place in their hearts forever. But I've learned that erasing yourself for others doesn't guarantee they'll remember the outline you left behind. The funny thing is I still made a wish. Sitting there with that lonely slice of cake, I closed my eyes and wished not for a visit or a gift, but simply to be remembered, just once. Not because someone reminded them, but because something in their chest stirred and whispered, "Today is her day." I stayed up late that night, sat by the window with a blanket around my shoulders and watched the moon move across the sky. I thought about the year I turned 39, how my youngest made me a card covered in glitter and spelling mistakes. I still have it, tucked into the pages of a cookbook I can't lift anymore. That card said, "You are the best mommy in the whole world." I must have read it 100 times. It was the last year I felt seen. Here, birthdays are marked with generic cards and store-bought cupcakes if you're lucky. I watched another woman down the hall get a bouquet last week. Her son came in, placed the flowers on her tray, and left within 5 minutes. She clutched the stems like they were gold. I understood that. We take whatever we can get. The next day, one of the nurses asked if I wanted to write to my family, maybe hint at how I felt. I said no. I've sent enough letters into silence. I don't want to beg for something so simple as being remembered. It should come freely, or not at all. But in the quiet, I still whisper their names. I trace them in my mind like worn prayer beads, not with anger, not even sadness, just with longing and love. Because even now, even after another forgotten birthday, I love them. It's not the kind of love that expects anything back. It's the kind that lingers in the empty spaces, that grows soft instead of bitter. The kind that keeps a drawer full of cards no one asks about. The kind that blows out a single candle and says, maybe next year, or maybe not. But I'll keep a slice of cake in my heart anyway. He stood in the doorway holding a gift bag like it weighed too much for him. My son, my youngest. It had been months since I'd seen him, nearly a year if I'm honest. I wanted to smile, to rush toward him, to tell him how much I'd missed his face, how many times I'd whispered his name in the quiet. but I didn't move. I sat still on the bed, watching him, waiting to see if he'd see me, the way I still saw him. He didn't, not really. He stepped into the room cautiously, like it wasn't his to enter, looked around as if he were searching for something to comment on. "You've got a nice view," he said, nodding toward the tiny square of window overlooking the back parking lot. I murmured something, maybe agreement, maybe just sound to fill the space between us. Then he handed me the bag. Inside was a candle, lavender unused, a generic card with my name written in rushed handwriting. No message, just his name at the bottom. No, love, no. Mom, I hope you're well. Just a signature like I was a business transaction. I thanked him. Of course I did. I told him it was lovely, but all I could think about was how this was the boy who used to climb into my bed after bad dreams and press his face into my neck, whispering, "Don't let go." And now he couldn't look me in the eyes for more than a second at a time. We sat for a while exchanging scattered words. Small talk. How was the food? Was I sleeping well? Was there anything I needed? And I answered, politely, neatly, like a patient, not a mother. Then, as suddenly as he'd arrived, he checked his watch and stood, said he had to get back to the office. Deadlines, meetings, life. He gave me a quick hug, one of those brief, hovering hugs that barely touches you, and walked out the door with a distracted wave. I sat there for a long time after he left, still holding the bag on my lap, the candle unlit, my chest strangely hollow. He had forgotten the stories. I could see it in the way he glanced at the bookshelf without recognition. Once I had read to him, through fevers, through storms, through his heartbreak over a broken toy or a scraped knee. I had shaped his world with my words, and now he couldn't even ask me how I really was. It wasn't cruelty, it was distance, time, and the slow erosion of roles we thought were permanent. Later that night, I took out an old photo from my drawer, one where he's 5, beaming up at me, his arms thrown around my neck like I was the safest place on earth. I held that photo and whispered the story I used to tell him, the one about the knight who lost his way, but always found home again. I told it to the walls, to the night, to whatever version of him might still live inside me, curled up and waiting for a voice to guide him to sleep. No one came, and still I finished the story. Because that's what I do, even when no one listens, even when the only echo is my own breath. There is something heartbreakingly holy about continuing anyway, about refusing to abandon the story just because the audience forgets the sound of your voice. The next day, the candle still sat on my dresser untouched. I looked at it and thought about lighting it just once, just to fill the room with something warm. But I didn't. I left it there unopened, a symbol maybe, or a memory waiting to happen. Some part of me still believes he'll remember, that one day he'll smell lavender and stop mid-step, eyes stinging, unsure why. That the scent will lead him back not to this room, not to this moment, but to a bedtime, a story, a mother who never let the darkness in without a fight. Until then, I will keep telling the stories. Even if the only thing listening is a cold wax candle, there was one story I never got to finish. A story I had saved for a special night, the kind where the air feels a little softer, and everything hushes just enough to make room for magic. I had crafted it slowly over years, stitching together bits from fairy tales, memories, dreams I used to have when I was a little girl myself. It was meant to be the final bedtime story, the one I would tell when they were just old enough to understand that not all stories end the way we expect, but still carry truth, still carry love. But the night never came. There was always something else, Homework, sleepovers, teenage moods, and closed bedroom doors. They outgrew me before I could offer it. And I kept waiting for the right time, thinking maybe on a quiet visit home or over the phone when the world slowed down just enough for remembering. But the right time never arrived. The story sat in my chest fully formed but unspoken, a gift with no hands left to receive it. It was about a woman older, quiet, forgotten by her village. They thought she was just a weaver of tales, someone whose time had passed. But every night, she would sit by her window and whisper stories into the wind. What the villagers didn't know was that the wind carried those stories across valleys and rivers, into the ears of travelers and children far away. And every now and then a stranger would arrive, their eyes filled with wonder, not knowing why they were drawn to her doorstep. The old woman never asked them questions. She only smiled and began a story, the same one she had whispered for years, the one they came to hear. I wanted to tell that to my children. I wanted to say, even if you don't see me, if you don't visit or call, my love still finds you, like that wind, like that story. But I never got the chance. And now I whisper it to the wall, not all at once, just in pieces, a paragraph here, a sentence there, sometimes just a line murmured while I fold laundry or rest in my chair. I wonder if the wall knows the ending. I wonder if it waits for me to finish the way they never did. Sometimes I dream of sitting across from them just once more the way it used to be, their eyes sleepy, their hands still sticky from dinner, their heads resting against my shoulder. I clear my throat and begin, there once was a woman who spoke to the wind, and they'd listen, really listen. Not with impatience or politeness, but with the open-hearted wonder of a child who still believes. But that's not how life works. We don't get retakes. We don't get final performances. Sometimes the curtain falls and you realize you are still holding your last line. I think about that story often, how it ends, whether the woman is ever thanked, whether anyone ever truly hears her. I don't know. And maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it's enough that she kept telling it even when no one was listening. Maybe that's what love is. I tried telling a version of it to one of the staff members last week. She was young, bright-eyed, always kind in a distant sort of way. She smiled and nodded as I spoke, but I could tell her mind was already moving on to her shift schedule, her weekend plans. And I stopped halfway through pretending I lost my place. She didn't notice. She just patted my hand and said, "You've got such a great imagination." It wasn't imagination, it was memory. It was the last thing I hadn't given away. I used to think stories needed listeners. Now I think they just need breath, a voice, even a faint one, even one that shakes. So I keep telling it. To the empty room, to the cool evening breeze slipping through a cracked window, to the shape of myself reflected in the darkened glass. I tell the story not because someone will hear it, but because I still remember how. Some nights when the walls feel too close and the silence presses in like fog, I speak just to hear something human. Not loud, never loud, just the soft murmur of a voice, long forgotten by the ones it once cradled. I speak to the walls, the nightstand, the shadows cast by the lamp. I speak to the empty chair beside my bed and pretend just for a moment that someone is there, that someone still needs me to guide them into sleep. I whisper the stories I once told 100 times, maybe more. The one about the bear who got lost in a snowstorm. The one where the moon fell from the sky, and the children had to find a way to hang it back up. I don't always remember every line perfectly, but I speak them as best I can. I don't worry about getting it right anymore. The only one listening is me. At first it felt foolish, this habit of talking to the air, but now it feels like breathing. like something I must do to keep from dissolving into the quiet. When I was a mother with young children, bedtime was our ritual, sacred. After the dishes, the baths, the arguments over pajamas, we'd settle into that soft, hush-lit space of pillows and pages. They'd pull the blankets up to their chins, their eyes wide in anticipation, and I would begin. And they would listen with their whole bodies, breath-held toes, curled minds wide open. And now I tell those same stories to myself. I say them slowly, savoring each word, like warm tea on a cold night. I speak them into the stillness and feel them float there, suspended in the space between who I was and who I am now. I often think of the last time someone asked me for a story. It wasn't one of my children, it was a nurse. She was new, just out of training, and sat with me during a power outage when the hallway lights flickered and the emergency backup hadn't kicked in yet. She looked nervous, clutching her tablet that wouldn't turn on. I could see her hands shaking slightly, not from fear, but from inexperience. So I said, "Would you like a story to pass the time?" She looked surprised, then nodded grateful. I told her one of the old ones, the story of the girl who lived in a library and befriended a book that came alive at night. She smiled, truly smiled, and when the lights came back, she touched my hand and said, "That was beautiful," and I felt something bloom in my chest. Not pride, not nostalgia, just presence. Someone had listened. That was months ago. She no longer works here, moved to a hospital closer to her family, I heard. But I still think about that night, how a few words shared in darkness made me feel real again. Since then, I've told stories every night, not always aloud, sometimes just in my mind, tracing the arcs and turns like old roads I once walked barefoot. I think about the children I raised. I wonder if they ever tell stories now, if they remember the bear, the moon, the girl with the magical book, if they pause mid-sentence and feel the tug of a line that once wrapped around them like a lullaby. I hope so. Even if they never tell me, even if they've forgotten the sound of my voice. Some nights I say their names out loud before I begin, just to feel them on my tongue, just to feel them in the room again. And then I tell myself to sleep. I pull the blanket up, I whisper a closing line. Something simple like, "And they slept soundly knowing they were loved." And then I close my eyes. Alone, but never empty. The dolls still sit on my shelf, 3 of them each with a different expression. One smiling, one solemn, one calm in a kind of eternal surprise. They aren't expensive. Their dresses are worn. Their curls flatten the plastic skin dulled by time and touch. But they mattered once. They were played with, sung to given names and stories and tiny tea parties on rainy afternoons. Now they watch from their corner collecting dust, waiting for hands that are no longer small. I brought them with me when I moved here, not because I thought anyone else would care, but because I couldn't leave them behind. They were part of the house. Part of the days when the living room became a kingdom, and I was both queen and maid. I remember stepping carefully over them, so I wouldn't disturb the sleeping princess or injured patient scenarios my children created. I used to be a voice for the dolls, too, giving them lines, personalities, accents. Anything to make the day stretch softer, the world feel safer. I didn't think I'd miss that part of motherhood, the pretend, the plastic, the mess, but I do, desperately, because those dolls weren't just toys. They were the bridge between my children's inner worlds and mine. We built things together, not just games, but trust, affection, a rhythm. And now that rhythm is gone. No one asks about the dolls. Sometimes the staff will straighten them while dusting reposition their arms or tidy their skirts, but never with recognition. They're just clutter to everyone else. But I still greet them in the morning, still glance at them when I pass. I think in some quiet way I've become one of them. Propped up, preserved, but no longer played with. Still here, but not truly seen. One day last week, a little girl came through on a tour. Her grandmother, I suppose, was considering moving in. The girl wandered into my room by mistake while I was brushing my hair. She stopped wide-eyed when she saw the dolls, her hand lifted instinctively, a silent question written on her face. I smiled and said, "You can hold one if you'd like." She walked slowly, carefully, as if approaching a sacred thing, picked up the surprised one, turned it over in her small hands, studied it with the kind of reverence only children have for forgotten treasures. She didn't say a word, just held it, looked at me, and nodded like we understood each other. And in that moment, something old inside me stirred, a flicker, a thread that stretched backward through years of silence and gray walls. Her grandmother called, and she placed the doll back with such gentleness it almost broke me. As she left, she said, "She's pretty," and I said yes. She was loved. After she was gone, I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the doll myself. My hands are older now, thinner, more careful, but they remembered the weight, the posture, the voice I used to give her. I said one line, just one, the same one I always used to begin our pretend adventures, and it was as if no time had passed. Sometimes I think those dolls hold more of me than any photo ever could. They've heard my stories, felt my hands, listened to my laughter and my sighs. They've watched my children grow up and away. They've endured. Like me, I dust them myself now, carefully, as if tending to sacred relics, because they are. They are what remains. And there's dignity in remembering what once was cherished. I know someday they'll be boxed up, donated, lost to someone else's playroom or storage bin, and that's all right. Let them go on to be part of new stories. Let them be loved again, even if by strangers. That's what I wish for myself too, quietly, gently to matter again, even if only in someone else's passing glance. Until then, I'll keep them close. And when I need to remember who I was, I'll pick one up, cradle it in my palms, and whisper softly, "Once upon a time, you were everything." She was just a nurse, really. Just one of the many faces that come and go in this place. Young, overworked, tired, behind the eyes, but always trying to smile. I never expected anything more than the usual: a chart checked, a pill delivered, a nod at the door. But that day something was different. I was humming, not for anyone, just for myself, one of the old lullabies. I didn't even realize I was doing it until I looked up and saw her standing in the doorway, frozen eyes wide and shimmering like glass about to break. She didn't speak right away, just stared at me like I'd opened a door she didn't know she'd locked. That song, she finally said. My mother used to sing that to me, and I felt something shift, a thread weaving from me to her, thin but unmistakably real. I nodded and kept humming softer now. She stepped into the room, no clipboard, no gloves, just herself. She sat beside me and said almost apologetically, "I haven't heard it in years. I didn't even know I remembered it until just now." So I told her the story, the one I used to sing with the lullaby, a simple one, about a silver bird who lost her voice and traveled the world trying to find it again. I didn't mean to tell the whole thing, but once I started, it came like breath. She listened with her whole face, her whole body, the way my children once did, and when I finished, she didn't clap or speak. She just cried. I didn't know I needed to hear that she whispered, and I wanted to tell her I didn't know I needed to say it, but instead I just reached for her hand, and we sat in the quiet, two women caught in the same thread of memory and music. After that, she visited more often, not always for long. Sometimes just to wave through the door, sometimes to sit with me while I combed my hair. She asked questions about the stories, the songs, my life before these beige walls. And I answered piece by piece, carefully unwrapping parts of myself I hadn't touched in years. It's a strange thing being seen again, not because you're being monitored or assisted, but simply because someone is curious. Someone wants to know who you were before you became this folded name in a file, this appointment on a calendar, this woman with a pill schedule. One afternoon she asked, "Do you ever wish they'd come visit more?" And I could have lied, could have said I understood, that I was fine, but I didn't. I said yes. I miss them every day. And she nodded, no pity in her face, just understanding. And somehow that was enough. Later that week, I heard her humming the lullaby down the hall. Not perfectly, not with all the notes in place, but it was there, echoing softly past my door. I laid back on my pillow and let it wash over me. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a woman forgotten. I felt like a voice that still lingered, a thread that hadn't broken. I know she'll leave eventually. They always do. Rotation, promotion, relocation, whatever the reason people like her don't stay. But I'm grateful, because in that brief window of time, someone heard me. Not just my stories, but me. And once someone hears you, really hears you, it stays, it echoes, it seeds. She may forget the details. She may forget the names of the birds and the songs and the metaphors I wove into my bedtime tales, but something in her chest will carry the warmth. And someday when she's rocking her own child or sitting in her own silence, maybe the melody will rise again. And she'll remember the woman in the pale blue cardigan who hummed while brushing her thinning hair. And I will have existed in her story, even just for a verse. I packed them away yesterday, the books, the dolls, the photo frame with the fading vacation smile. Not because I stopped caring, God no, but because the nurse hinted gently that maybe I'd feel better with less clutter. I understood what she meant. They always try to say things softly here, wrapping their words in cotton. I nodded, smiled, said, "Of course." Then I closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the shelf for a long while. Each item had weight, not in pounds or ounces, but in years, in memories, in breath and lullabies, and sticky hands and tired shoulders. I held the first book, its spine broken, its pages soft as fabric, and ran my thumb over the faded cover. I remembered the first night I read it. I remembered the voice I used, the laugh that came from the bunk bed, the way my child's head tilted as if the story were music. I kissed the cover, not out of habit, but reverence. Then I laid it gently in the box. One by one, I gave them my quiet farewell, a whispered thank you, a pause, a memory. The dolls were last. I almost didn't pack them. My fingers hesitated, unsure. I thought about that little girl, the one who came by accident and treated them like treasure. I wished I could give them to her. I wished someone wanted them the way they had once been wanted. But there was no one to ask, so I wrapped them in soft shirts I no longer wear and placed them inside. When I taped the box shut, I didn't cry. I thought I would, but instead I sat still, hands in my lap, and listened to the new silence of my room. It felt deeper, not empty exactly, just different, like the quiet after a final page is turned. I labeled the box in small letters, books and keepsakes. I didn't write memories. That would have been too much, too final. The nurse offered to store it for me in the staff closet. I nodded. She lifted it like it was nothing, and maybe to her it was, just another box among many. But to me, it was a body, a life, a chapter I'd finally allowed to close. The room feels larger now, clean, sparse, the walls more bare than ever. But I notice things I hadn't before, the way the light shifts in the late afternoon, how the sound of footsteps echoes longer without objects to catch it. I try to tell myself that space is good, that simplicity brings peace, but a part of me aches for the weight of what's been taken away. I thought letting go would feel like relief, but it feels more like surrender. Not bitter surrender, just the kind that comes when your hands are tired and you've held on for long enough. I wonder what they'll do with the box someday, if it'll be opened, rifled through, divided up, or discarded. I wonder if any of it will make someone pause, if a child's scrawl inside the cover of a book will stir something, if the name written on the tag of a doll's dress will make someone smile. Or maybe it will all be anonymous, the way I've become. Still, as I sit here, I tell myself one small truth. I was the one who remembered. I carried those stories. I preserved the tenderness. I guarded it when no one else did. And even now, stripped of keepsakes, sitting in a room that echoes when I shift my weight, I still carry them. They are not on the shelves. They are inside me. The bookshelf is empty, but I am not. There's a quiet kind of power in being the last to leave a room, not in the dramatic way they show in films with doors slamming and suitcases packed. No, I mean the quiet leave-taking, the kind that happens without footsteps, without goodbyes, just the soft withdrawal of presence. That's what I did slowly from their lives, not because I stopped loving them, but because I got tired of knocking on a door that never opened. There was a time they used to call, not every day, but often enough that I could count on hearing their voices, hurried, distracted, but still warm. Then the calls came less often, the messages shorter. Hey, sorry I missed you. I'll call soon. Soon became later, then later became never. Eventually, they stopped returning my calls at all. At first I panicked, thought something terrible had happened. I called again, then again, left voicemails, tried not to sound desperate, though every word I left behind felt like a plea wrapped in politeness. And when the silence remained, I told myself they were busy, that they had lives, that maybe they'd circle back around when the whirlwind calmed. But they didn't. So I stopped calling. Not out of anger, not even sadness, just understanding. You see, there comes a time in a woman's life, especially a mother's, when you realize you've become background, scenery, a memory whose details have gone soft around the edges, and the more you try to remind them, the more invisible you seem to become. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want my voice to be something they sighed about before pressing ignore. So I gave them silence. And in that silence, I began to hear myself again. It started with small things, noticing the sound of my own breath in the early morning hours, letting my thoughts move without narrating them for someone else, remembering what it feels like to sit still without waiting to be needed. And yes, the silence hurt. At first it was a sharp ache, like frostbite at the edges of who I used to be. But over time it became something else, something softer, something honest. Because in that hush, I realized the stories I used to tell weren't just for them. They were mine too. I used to believe my worth was measured by how much I gave, how many needs I met, how many times I bit my tongue, stayed up late, gave the last piece of pie without saying a word. But now I see I was always whole even when I was overlooked. I didn't need to be loud. I didn't need to chase them. I didn't need to hold out my arms, hoping they'd return to them. I needed to sit quietly and reclaim the space I once filled so easily without apology. Last night I sat at the window with a cup of lukewarm tea and spoke aloud just once, I'm still here. Not for them, for me. Because my voice still matters even if no one listens, because I remember the stories, because I lived them, because I carried love even when it wasn't returned, because I stayed soft in a world that taught me to disappear. And that softness, that quiet endurance, it's mine. Maybe they'll remember me one day. Maybe a song will echo through a store speaker, or a line from an old story will drift into their child's bedtime. Maybe they'll pause, eyes distant, and say, "My mother used to tell that one." Or maybe they won't. But I'll still be here, breathing, humming, whispering old tales to the walls that never left. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough. So now the days pass slower, like pages turning without urgency. The sun moves across my floor like a silent metronome, and I've learned to follow its rhythm without rushing. The room is bare now, but not empty. There are stories here tucked into the corners, folded into the quiet, and I have learned to listen to them. Sometimes I still speak softly, gently, not to be heard, but to remember. My voice no longer needs to prove anything. It has weathered storms. It has sung lullabies that healed fevers and heartaches alike. It has whispered forgiveness into the dark. I sit with that now, not with bitterness, not with regret, but with a kind of sacred stillness. Because I know this, I was not forgotten by life. I was not erased by silence. I was simply paused, shelved maybe, but never broken. And in this slow, soft closing of days, I've found something I never expected to find. So late peace. Not the kind you earn, but the kind you quietly arrive at after walking miles with a heavy heart. I no longer wait to be remembered. I remember myself. I remember the sound of my own laughter, the smell of warm bread, the feel of a tiny hand wrapping around my finger, the stories that made a home out of air and voice and love. And that is where I live now. Not in bitterness, not in waiting, but in the gentle truth that I was always enough. I gave them silence, and in it I found peace.